Sun Tzu said, strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory. Greetings, users of the World Wide Web. My name is Joe, and some people call me the Nemean Beard. So our first video, we want to spend some time in strategy and tactics, right? We want to develop some high-level ideas about our campaign that if we spend a little bit of time here, it will save us some time down the road and hopefully some consternation as well. The first thing we want to do, and chances are you've already done this, is just think about some of the worlds that you enjoy. Maybe you read about them, maybe you played in a video game, saw it on a show or a movie, and then think about what it would be like to present that world to somebody. Like if you were trying to present Skyrim as your own setting, what is it about Skyrim that gets you excited, that you really think, man, I wish I could run D&D in this world? And I'm just going to do a few examples, and it might help you if you just scribble down, if you just scribble down some thoughts about worlds that you enjoy as well. Middle Earth, it's a classic. I love it. I fell in love with it young, and I've only fallen more in love with it. And I love that it's filled with this history. That when we meet Bilbo for the first time, there in the Shire and with Gandalf, we don't really learn a whole lot, but as we traverse through the story, and we they get the troll swords, and then this history starts to unravel. Like I think about in the movie, right, when Aragorn tells the hobbits that this is that Weathertop is this the great watchtower of Amon Sul, right? And I think that's a great example of the PC's passing a history check and the DM sort of naturally revealing stuff about his world. And so I love Middle Earth. I love the idea of exploring not just the landscape, but the history also. The old world of Warhammer Fantasy role-playing. The Empire, or the Old World as it's called, it's grim, it's perilous. Few survive adventuring, let alone become heroes. Those that survive are often tainted by chaos, and you can't rightly call them heroes. What I love about the Old World is the grimness, the darkness, that gritty feeling. But what really struck me as I played was how deadly the combat was. It was so different from just the hit point allocation of D&D, and I really enjoyed that. And when you're playing in Warhammer Fantasy role-playing, especially in first or second edition, man, you really got to think a little bit before you just engage. You just run up on a troll or an ogre or something like that. The next one, a lot of you know, Robert E. Howard's Hyboria. This is where the world of Conan sort of takes place. And I like that the idea, the world seems small enough that you could really meet anybody, yet it's large enough that it has all this mystery, and a majority of the map isn't really filled in. Now, some of that has to do with the lore of how we get to the Hyborian age in a lot of the Conan novels and whatnot. But Conan always finds himself in, now I'm talking about the books, not necessarily the comic book or the movie. Although the movies kind of do it some justice, but Conan always finds himself in some forgotten ruin, fighting against these strange creatures that don't really adhere to the conventions of physics or normal combat, or things that you take for granted. I love the idea of mystery and dread and how it kind of blends the idea of eldritch horror and fantasy together. And we see that a lot in the foul sorceries that is typical of a villain in the Conan stories. And I just really like that idea that you don't really know everything that's out there. There's plenty to be discovered. There's a lot that has been forgotten and probably should stay that way. Westeros. I have a lot of mixed feelings about this between the show and the novels, but I really just enjoy a lot of the intrigue and the politics, and um, the world itself is fascinating. Don't get me wrong, but I really enjoy how the location and landscape kind of build into the characters a certain ideal, or almost want to say nobility or lack thereof, which in turn kind of feeds into their politics, which leads to lots of death and lots of war. But I like the idea that um, there's more to the character than just being the man with no name. There's always the idea of ascending in the social rank, or um, doing something to benefit one's house as opposed to just lining your pockets with gold. But that's important too in Westeros. And I just like how those things kind of meet. Um, Now, the last one, I know I said I was going to do like 3 to 5, and I think this is number 5. It's not really, it's probably something you haven't heard of, but there was an old supplement of D&D called Thunder Rift, and it's like in the self-contained valley. There's mountains all around it, and actually there's like a kind of an adventure path. They didn't really call it that, but in order to get out, you kind of have to use this magic portal. Um, it may officially exist in the Mystera or the Greyhawk setting, but really it's cut off from the known world. That's how it presents itself. So you can plant it anywhere, and it provides everything you need to run some adventures. There's a few settlements. There's a capital. That's the source of government that kind of runs this valley, and it's sort of set up as a hex crawl. Now, that's not really something that's super popular anymore, um, but it really allows for a lot of exploration and just kind of finding some different things. Um, and I think that's a great way for the PCs to learn about your world in a natural way. And I wish I wish Hexcrawl was more popular, but it is what it is. Now, like I said, chances are you've already done some of this stuff before. Maybe you just didn't write it down. And you can make this as detailed as you like. And don't let anyone tell you um, that some of your ideas will never work. You can't mix some of these things. That's not true. If it makes you excited about running the game, do that. I mean, I remember reading about this guy that was talking about D&D and sci-fi and wanting to blend those two. And I remember playing through Expedition to the Barrier Peaks, and I remember playing through the Gates of Firestorm Mountain, or at least buying it and looking through it, and just thinking, man, my group they would never want to do this. There's too much going on. But then I remember reading a blog about there was a school of magic, and they had discovered sort of this ruin, and there were the artifacts coming out of there, and there were competing factions within the school, and so your group gets tasked by one person or another, and you go down, and the farther you go down, you find that it like switches genres, and it's very weird and disconcerting at first. And this guy's telling about this in this blog, that finally he gets to the reveal that this ruin is actually like this alien craft that you're basically going through like hollow decks, like so your fantasy adventure guy like pops into like a film, film noir, like a detective style mystery, and it sounded cool to me. Like he made it work. Like I never would have thought of that, but he made it work. His friends had a lot of fun while they played, and so don't let people tell you that you shouldn't run this or that, or that you have to run D&D out of the box. That's not true. We wouldn't have the hobby today if people just ran, stuff that came printed in a manual. But I digress. Get a drink of coffee here real quick. Now, if we look at kind of this thing as a whole, that we talked about some things that I like um, in the thing, I think we see I kind of prefer a low magic setting. I like the idea that magic isn't a solution for everything, which, by the way, they kind of have done as a design point, probably through most editions, but definitely in 5e. There's kind of a magical answer for everything. You have magical answer for combat, for healing, for stealth, for skill checks, for knowledge acquisition, lore acquisition, uh, and so on and so forth. And that's okay. I'm not hating on that at all. I just like kind of a different style of play, I think. Um, and so it will also behoove us, and I like the bees and their hooves, by the way, so I'll probably talk about them a lot. But it might help us to think about, as kind of this nebulous idea of our world is beginning to take shape, what it looks like, um, to look like, to think about what it. Sorry. Um, It would also behoove us. I like the bees and their hooves, by the way, and I'll probably talk about them a lot. But it will behoove us to think about, as the idea of our world develops, what it looks like across the three pillars of play. How we present that, how we present our world across the three pillars of play. In 5e, Wizards of the Coast has postulated that D&D kind of sits on these three pillars, or axes of play, and they are combat, exploration, and social interaction. Now, whether you agree with those or not is kind of beside the point. Wizard has kind of made it a thing that from a design standpoint, they're going to focus on these things. So when they're developing classes or subclasses or feats, venture spells, etc., they're thinking about those three. So again, think about how it feels to go through, how it feels to present what you want to evoke at the table and in your players through some of these things. Try to incorporate some things in your previous list about the world you like into some of those things. So for combat, for me, now I don't want to go like full hardcore mode, but I do like the idea of adventures having the idea of real danger, the feel of peril. I like the idea that combat's dangerous enough that maybe you think longer, you think about, um, do you want to enter combat? And the longer you're in combat, maybe you start to think about different options, because the longer you're in combat, the worse it might go for you. And I think that thought, just having that thought in the players' heads, it causes them to be more creative, and you end up with solutions to the encounters that isn't just murder hoboing everything to death. And some of the murder hobo mentality has to do with the way they actually set up combat encounters in D&D. And it's probably the pillar that they design around the most. And Matt Colville once said, that he believes D&D is a monster fighting game and there's other things around it. And I tend to agree with that. Wizards certainly gives us, and D&D through the ages has really, it developed from a war game and developed from a fighting game. And then that's kind of the most tools they give you. Some would say the only tool they give you, but even just flipping through the manual or the player's handbook, even the Dungeon Master Guide, you can see that there's a lot of attention devoted to combat. But I'll talk about how to design encounters with different goals other than to just kill everything, maybe in a later video. But I do want to be able to apply different narratives to a scene, um, even though it's combat, right? Just like the Fellowship of the Ring fleeing the mines of Moria. Or when in the 13th Warrior, when the group of Northmen kind of stealth through the caves of the Windle, right? It also, I think, when you have different goals in combat, keeps things fresh. It helps you to avoid the slog, so to speak. The next pillar is exploration. Now, this has always been kind of a tense subject too. Nobody likes the idea of boring travel, but we also want to get to the entree a lot of times. And I've sat through plenty of games where we actually don't even make it to the adventure, but there's no real scheme behind it. We're just rolling on lots of tables. And 5e with its milestone XP, you might do a lot of this stuff and not even get any benefit from it. But also just hand waving the travel feels a little cheap to me. Now, I've been playing a lot of Adventures in Middle Earth, running it actually, for 5e by Cubicle 7 Games. And they have a thing called the Journey system, and I really enjoy that. I feel like it's very innovative. It keeps travel fresh. It feels like an accomplishment when you make this journey of traveling, a distance through the dangerous wilds. And just me thinking about that, I think about, again, putting that choice between your players. Like, do you travel the road? If you travel the road, more than likely you're safer, travels faster, but you run the risk of bandits on the road. Well, did you murder hobo in your last town? There might be authorities looking for you. So the road might not be the best place for you. So maybe you need to travel through the wilds. Now, the wilds are dangerous, slows you down. If we did something like that, it might actually be a benefit to some of the rangers, a lot of the rangers' other abilities other than just do more damage to a specific monster or fire a bunch of arrows around. Don't get me wrong, that's awesome, but I feel like the ranger might really shine in a setting that, that some of these things hinged on. Now, the last one is social interaction, and this is kind of the hardest one to pinpoint. Now, when we say social interaction, I don't mean the dungeon master taking on the character of an NPC and interacting with the character of one of your players. Now, certainly it can be that, but when I think of social interaction, I think of that I want the PCs to develop relationships wherever they're at within the world. To me, this is why things like backstory and where they came from, are their parents alive? Do they have siblings? Do they have a wife? Do they have kids? Are they part of a faction or an order? These things, I think some of the highest quality role-playing can come from some of these relationships, some of these people, NPCs that the PCs kind of bring to life. Relationships are important, and I like the thought that maybe they're so important that your adventurers, your heroes, they might actually count the cost before they go out and adventure. When Samwise leaves the Shire, you can tell he's genuinely leaving something behind. He's making a choice whether he's going to follow Mr. Frodo and keep an eye on him, right? Or whether he's going to stay and he chooses to leave, right? He's kind of got that line. It's a meme now, but one more step, Mr. Frodo, and this is the farthest I've ever been from the Shire, right? There's the idea that he's leaving behind this possible romance with Rosie, that he's leaving behind the Shire, his friends, his hobbit comfort and way of life. In Game of Thrones, right, there's always other interests than just going out and doing the thing. There's trade deals, alliances, currying favor. How does an adventurer do that when they're in the dungeon all the time? So, and I know it's makes more sense to play an adventurer unattached, right? But even adventurers have to have some sort of contact or relationship. They need a place where they can sell their magic items. They need the rogue might need a fence or a thieves guild to sort of, continue doing his rogue things. The PCs might need healing or aid or able to get through a blockade on the road, or they might need a map to find the pass through the mountains, so on and so forth. So relationships should be important. So I don't want to belabor the point, but one final thought as a narrative note is I also want to focus on the human experience. And I don't mean human as in race or ancestry or heritage. Nothing mechanical. I mean it in the terms of the human experience as we go through life, the hope, the expectation, the fear of the unknown, the flaws that drive us, the ideals that hold us to a higher standard, the reaction to defeat or victory, dealing with loss, fulfillment, betrayal, loyalty, the reality of life. I think in a way, the fantasy of being heroes, we sometimes get away from the fact that they're actually like people. And I want the idea of, the reality of life, the human experience in my game. So now that we've seen some of these things come together, let's try to distill them down into like an elevator pitch. So for me, I want a low, and you don't have to have a statement, by the way. What we want is like a mission statement almost, something we can go back to make sure our world building lines up. It lines up with the vision that we have for our world, and we're not like getting 3 steps away just because we're chasing every squirrel that pops up in our imagination. But what I want is a low magic setting, but high fantasy. But it doesn't allow magic to solve every problem or challenge the party faces. I want a game that focuses on the path of characters, both PC and NPC, and the story, that consists of dangerous combat, where standing and fighting may not be the most desired thing, that journeying through the world will hold up to inspection, and that the adventurers would count the cost before they set out to venture into the dungeon or storm the castle or slay the dragon, that maybe something close to home matters more. Now, as a note, as we close, you can always come back and revise this, or if you don't like this method, this will be true of every step of this, but throw it out, do it your way, right? There isn't one formula for how your world can come together, but I just know from an organizational standpoint and kind of a big picture, a big view, this helps me. So that is the video. I hope it was beneficial. If you have some ideas, whether it's a world that you love and gets you excited about D&D, or you have your own elevator pitch, or your own ideas about the pillars of play, drop those things in the comments. For our next video, we're going to take a macro view. We're going to look at the map. And this is exciting to me. This is one of the reasons I wanted to be a dungeon master, was to make maps. So same builder time, same builder channel. Until then, keep rolling.